We hope to see you at many more. Lectures are sort of one of the exciting moments when the bulk of the school can get together with friends and colleagues from outside of the school to look at what's happening in the field, not just in architecture, but in engineering and the arts. Tonight, I'm very pleased to have the lecture series start with an old friend of the school and an old friend of mine, Brian McGrath. Brian's a graduate of Syracuse University and also Princeton University, where he received his master's. And I was looking at some of the dates and realized that Brian had also had part of his formative years spent at the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies, which was a school that Peter Eisenman had started probably in the late 60s, early 70s. And he was there in 1978, which is where we first met. And I think just recently, many of the people in this room had a lecture about what kinds of things to do for thesis. And there was a discussion about finding things that you really like to do, things that you're going to stick with. And I think about Brian's thesis when he was at Princeton, which is just a couple of years ago now.
Tell them why you know it well.
Someone you know built the model. And if these hands could speak. And the project was in Natchez, which was interesting. It's along the Natchez Trace, and which was interesting for me because Brian had generally worked in urban sites. But his thesis project was to do an eco-sustainable community. And this is in 1980-81. So it's interesting to see this interest in landscape, in issues of sustainability, in some way morphed with a kind of fascination with representation and film, which sounds like somehow disparate things to go together. But it was at the Institute that we had both read an article that was republished in Oppositions about Eisenstein. And it was about Eisenstein writing about architecture and his fascination with film and architecture and looking at the way that architecture structures a sequence of images and a sequence of spaces. For those of you who have had Brian's class in his VC studios, you'll remember this intensity about drawing and about representation and also about film. Brian will talk about some of those issues tonight. His book, Cinemetrics, which was recently published by Wiley, will be available after the lecture. And I think, Brian, you will sign books. Though Brian tells me the soft cover you can get on cheaper on Amazon. This is not Brian's first book. His first book is Transparent Cities. And for those of you who are gamblers, Brian tells me that original copies of Transparent Cities now go for $500. So maybe this is a good investment now. Just keep it wrapped, which is a little bit of a problem if you actually want to read the book. Brian's also spent a good deal of time in Thailand. He's taught at Chulalongkorn as a Fulbright senior scholar and taught for 15 years at Columbia University in the Master's in Science in Architecture and Urban Design. He's currently working on another book which follows Cinemetrics and also Sensing the 21st City. And this book will be on digital modeling for urban design. Brian's recently began as an associate professor in urban design at the Parsons School of Design in New York. And with that, I'm very pleased to welcome Brian McGrath.
Hello. Thank you, Mark. Mark asked me to talk about patch dynamics. It's an ecological theory that I've been using for urban design work and research. But I have to say that I think Mark is putting into practice everything I'm going to theorize tonight, because I think he's showed tremendous leadership in this school of architecture. And I think Syracuse is now one of the leading schools in the country. I think it always had a good reputation of giving a solid education, and I benefit enormously for the undergraduate degree I had here. All this work is based on having a real solid training as an architect, as an undergraduate, and people like Art McDonald in the front row are responsible for that. But I think Syracuse is now a leading school. I mean, I go to the Harvards, the Yales. They're not thinking about the 21st century. It's still a 1920s, early 20th century profession. And I really think you're all part of a leading school of architecture here. So thank you, Mark. It's great to be part of that. So patch dynamics in the production of difference is the title of this lecture. And I'm going to go back and forth between reading a few texts that I wrote and going through quite a few images. And Mark's going to tell me when it's 5:45, the other Mark, Linda. And so this afternoon I'd like to focus on research work, because rather than my design work, I want to situate the practice of architecture within both expanded disciplinary and geographic fields, broadening its analytical framework to consider the relationships between ecological, social, and economic dynamics encompassing global and interstate urban and rural networks. The issues framing this lecture will circulate around questions of capacity, the ability or the maximum to absorb the maximum amount of flows, information, material, and people a city, an environment, a body can receive, filter, and contain before catastrophe ensues, something you're all familiar with in charrette time. Capacity more precisely, and I'm going to test your capacity tonight with hundreds of images and concepts I'm going to bombard you with. Capacity more precisely is the actual or potential ability to perform, yield, or maintain resilience within increased volumes, velocities, and turbulence of flows. In this sense, it also includes human psychological and physiological capacities in the face of growing chaos, challenges, and stress. I will present patch dynamics as a theoretical framework through which ecology and design can join creative forces to create environments of social and human resilience in an urbanizing and globalizing world. The capacity I'm currently interested in sensing today is your capacity as an audience of architects to take in such a broad agenda in such a limited time frame and from such a precise, narrowly defined discipline. So the research begins with just a slideshow from India and China. I just completed a tour with economists, sociologists, community workers, activists through Delhi, Mumbai, Beijing, and Shanghai. This is the India-China Institute at the New School, which is the parent institution for Parsons School of Design. And we're looking at comparative approaches to urbanization and globalization. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the world population doubled in the past 40 years, from 3 billion to 6 billion. The world population is projected to grow another 3 billion by 2040, an increase of 50% in only 40 years. The UN Information Service reports that the world's urban population is estimated at 3 billion and is expected to rise to 5 billion by 2030. This year, for the first time in human history, half the world's population now live in cities. The proportion of the world's population that is urban is expected to rise to 61% by 2030. The world's urban population will double in 38 years. So don't worry, there's going to be plenty of work for architects out there, right? Or will there be? Population growth will be particularly rapid in the urban areas of newly industrialized regions, averaging 2.3% per year between 20 and 2030. Older industrial economies like our own, and more recently China, rely on 19th and 20th century logics and technologies. Coal for power, oil for cars. These technologies are backwards and unsustainable in the reliance on fossil fuels and mechanical thinking. Places like South Asia, Latin America, and Africa, well, this is the switch to China. You know, China has already decided it wants to be a 20th century city. And no one told them it's the 21st century. So it's countries like India, Latin America, countries of Africa, through their lower use of energy and resource per capita, are therefore more developed in a 21st century sustainable planning and design sense. But architects trained in mechanical thinking are lagging way behind. Almost all the world's total population between 2000 and 2030 is expected to be absorbed by the urban areas of these newly industrialized regions. The realities of the world's resource constraints require design, planning, and management which continually re-examines raw material availability, minimum run and load requirements, as well as components of social organizational capacity critical for high performance. Here's a high performance bedpan in the lanes of Shanghai. How can architects participate in this enormous paradigm shift and change of modalities that will accompany what Ulrich Beck calls the second modernity? I would argue that architects must engage in new transnational scales of thinking and transdisciplinary modes of collaboration. And so that's how I'd like to structure the research work I'll be presenting. These are recently moved farmers to their new housing. We were shown to allow for this development to take place. So I was searching for signs of farming here, and I found them mostly in the faces. This reminded me so much of my grandmother and my father on her knees when she arrived from Ireland, a farmer arriving in an industrialized society. And it was just things like tapping the storm drains for rainwater and planting outside the thing. So it was quite interesting to see this sort of appropriation of the space, but within a very highly controlled place. But this is the China we were shown. This is an urban management system where people with PDFs are running around the city looking for violations of public order, and it contributes to a huge database that is centrally managed and monitored. So this guy with his Gucci bags has to avoid the PDF and the photographers in order to continue to make a living in this newly structured environment. This is factory housing for Toshiba workers. This is migrant housing outside of Beijing. In China, you're issued a residency card, and if you're a farmer, you have a farmer's residency card for your life. If you're a city dweller, you have a city dweller's residency card for your life. So if your parents move to the city, you can't go to the public schools. So the nonprofit organization created the school in this former factory. And the kids had this great game with rocks, no Game Boys in this courtyard. Okay, I just want to go ahead because I'm gonna. I thought I'd skip ahead because Mark said to leave some time for questions, so I'm gonna breeze through a lot of this stuff and we can go back. So these are farmers' houses. In the areas that are going to be developed, the farmers allowed to build 4 stories, and so these farmers build their 4 stories, rent it out to migrant workers, build a little factory in the basement, and farm the land for the few years until the city plan comes in, and then they're bought out. But you see the rapidly disappearing, in this case, this is Hangzhou, outside of Shanghai, in a delta canal-based city. So the kind of canal-side houses being replaced by luxury high-rise condominiums. All with, you can see about 6 levels of parking. So it's completely car-based. This incredible transformation is relying on 20th century thinking and technologies. And these are the lanes in Shanghai that are being replaced by these high-rise condominiums. Okay, so Sensing the 21st Century City. This is the recent edition of AD that I co-authored with Graham Shane. And what we really were trying to set forth is an agenda of combining the close-up, which comes from cinema that Mark talked about, with the remote sensing GIS technologies. And so this is the scale shift we have to operate in as architects in the 21st century. And so the PDFs that we would like people to have we would like to give them not to government employees, but to citizens who are doing things like community gardens. So this is part of the Baltimore ecosystem studies. So community gardeners sort of log in their observations of what's happening, what's infesting the garden, was there garbage there today, into a database which is scaled up to the northeast quarter. This is a map of Boston to Washington. These are the tools that I think the 21st century architect has to operate within. So in order to make this leap from the handheld to the GIS reading of a region, we have to develop a theoretical framework to work with. And so I'm a co-PI, a principal investigator within a science project with 35 different science disciplines represented, from hydrology to plant ecology to social sciences, paleobotany, there's some really interesting fields you never heard of. And I'm the one architect on the team. They decided they wanted an architect. And so what we're doing is we're developing a system of understanding the relationship to be able to scale up the community garden to the whole northeast forest. Because basically all the cities from Boston to Washington occupy a hardwood forest. When the Europeans arrived here, it was intact, that are structured by watersheds, stream beds and watersheds along the whole thing. Every city you'll see has a river running through it. And so this is the patch dynamic framework, the system that we're working with. And of course, I don't have any time to get into the details, but just to give you a snapshot, the 5 color swatches that you see are 5 land cover types. And so it's a system that looks, instead of land use like planning has relied on before, it looks at land cover. Building, pavement, bare soil, grass, and trees and shrubs. So these are the 5 land covers. And we use satellite imagery and low-flying airplane imagery, very high resolution, less than a meter, with infrared technology, so it gives us data about urban reflectance. So we know the reflectance of a surface, we know the kind of surface that is there. Once we have the aerial imagery and the forest swatches, these are the possible patches that you can have. So each patch is a combination of different percentages of these 5 land covers. So you can see how 5 variables can produce so many different kinds of structured spaces. And so this is a watershed, and it stretches from the center of Baltimore to the farms at the periphery that are rapidly being turned into subdivisions, big mansions. The Beltway kind of cuts through the watershed here. You can see it straight line in half. And then there's a kind of feeder expressway that was built more recently to allow those suburbs to commute to the Beltway, where the economy is in the Beltway. And this is a city with a hollowed out center, much like Syracuse, because of this highway structure. So once we identify this combination of patches, there are certain families. And so this chart shows homogeneous and heterogeneous patches and going from built to vegetated. So different neighborhoods in every American city will be situated somewhere in here. And so these are all the patches that are dominated by the built fabric. And you can see that, sure, there's a lot in the inner city, the center city, but there's huge sections of highly dense built fabric way out into the suburbs. So this whole thing about a city being a center with a periphery doesn't exist in the American city anymore. That's what our research is showing. And you have pockets of density as dense at the periphery as you have in the inner city. And then you have these huge things, which are malls, of course, kind of in between. Cinemetrics, I'll show you, is really working from the other scale. Instead of the remote sensing down, it works from the body up and looks at our sensory motor apparatus and how we navigate through space in the world. And it's a drawing system that I developed over several years teaching at Parsons and Columbia in order to make architecture more responsive to human perception and interaction. Not as a static object, but as something that exists within this flowing matter flux that I referred to in the beginning of the lecture. Let's see. So this is just a little biographical detour. So this work started with the scientists. How did all the architects in the AIA, did they come to me? Well, frankly, it's because what Mark was talking about. I went to architecture school. It wasn't enough. I got a graduate degree. It wasn't enough. I worked for Polshek for 5 years. It wasn't enough. I read something that Goethe wrote in his Italian journal. I want to go to Italy and educate myself before I turned 30. So when I was 28, I went to Rome on my own, no fellowship, nothing. I just sat there for a year and tried to educate myself. So instead of being a receptor of knowledge, I wanted to produce knowledge myself. And so this is the book that came from it, eBay, $500, called Transparent Cities. And the reason is it drove the publisher out of business because he had to print the box, he had to print the little booklet, but then he had to print these 24 acetate plates, which are scaled down, hand-drawn, ink on mylar, like Art taught me, maps of the history of Rome and New York. And so, it really came from my education here. If you think about Collage City, but also Slutsky and Rowe's article about literal and phenomenal transparency, this was the inspiration for this work. So, but it really was my independent research that resulted in this. And so what it does is it looks at architecture, the city, as a landscape of flux and change. So when they laid out the grid in Manhattan, they had to flatten the topography and grade the streets. This is 2nd Avenue looking from 42nd Street, a block from the UN. And I love it. You know, this little house on the prairie, the woman with the parasol and the top hat, It looks like a catastrophe to us, right? But this is everyday life in New York, right? If you go there now, it's the same thing, scaffolding, construction, things like that. The American city is a work in progress and always will be. That's why we always have work as architects. The piers, the filling in of the water and landfill. And then the change in the city that's the hardest to look at physically, but had, in my experience of living in New York for 30 years now, the biggest impact on the city is this transformation. Can anyone recognize this transformation? What space is this, and what's happening in this space? What is it? Stock exchange. All right, who got that? You're halfway there. And what's happening? This is 1979. Pardon me? It's being remodeled for computer terminals. And they constructed, I went to the archives of the stock exchange. They constructed all the fiber optic cables and the computer terminals up in the ceiling because the paper trading had to go uninterrupted. One weekend, they came in, got rid of all the desks and chairs and paper, and 2001 Space Odyssey, this thing was slowly lowered like a disco ball into the space. And New York changed forever. It was really down on the heels when Mark and I were at the Institute in '78, and it's really a radically transformed city because of this new technology. So Transparent Cities, the project, looks at the archaeology of New York. I mean, we know the archaeology of Rome, but what about an archaeology of capitalism in New York? And so we see the transformation of a port colonial city to an industrial city to a kind of post-industrial financial capital. Later on, Carol Willis at the Skyscraper Museum asked me to do a project on the skyscrapers in New York. And I made this timeline. I don't know if you can turn your head on the left and read it, but it goes from 1880s to 1990s. And this I call the first wave of skyscrapers. Then this is World War II. The boom, the first boom of the roaring 20s, the stock market boom, the crash, 34. World War II, the only thing being built, Rockefeller Center, they still had money. And then it starts after the war. New York becomes the headquarters for corporate America, the suburbanization of America. So there's a kind of another wave and another boom. Then 75. What happened in 75? Why did everything come crashing in 75? O-I-L. OPEC, where was OPEC founded in 1974? The price of oil crisis, New York and much of the industrial economies, these 20th century oil-based economies I described, were held hostage by the consortium of oil producers. And so just whole acres of real estate was abandoned because landlords couldn't afford to heat rent-controlled apartments anymore. 79, we get a big spike again. What happened in 79? Short-term memory. That stock market thing came down. So the only way New York and this economy was able to recover was this new technology. And we're struggling along because this new technology is so new, it hasn't really replaced yet. So what I did is from that timeline, I made a computer model with, in the z-axis, I marked time. And so in this computer model, you can interact with it online, and you can look at the clustering in time. So now the timeline goes from there to the top, and you can see different places in the space of the city where skyscraper office buildings were constructed. And so you see the boom in the 20s, was really focused on Wall Street. The post-war boom goes from 42nd to 59th Street and never below, even though the skyscrapers before that kind of went along Broadway. So this is a kind of side view of Manhattan, where you can kind of see space and time relationships, patches of skyscrapers. So what happened is someone from the US Forest Service saw this online, because it was really remarkable. When you do an online project, you get an audience that you never expected. So many people from all sorts of different disciplines contacted me about this project. And this guy from the Forest Service says, well, we're interested in mapping trees the way you map skyscrapers. And it's a theory of patch dynamics, that as ecological succession, as plant material, grasses or trees or vegetation grows, it happens in space and time in particular patterns, and we want to understand that. So I was invited, thank you, Mary Kay, for the beautiful poster, and this is what that poster is all about. You kind of fly through, instead of a simulation of New York, this space. And so in that drawing on the poster, you're along 42nd Street, but you're in 1950. So you're in that space of no construction, right before the post-war buildings start. Okay, and what you can study is like the change of building skyscraper morphology through interventions of technology, curtain wall, air conditioning, urban planning guidelines and rules and things like that. And so. So while I was an architect, very interested in the content of this project, in fact, what a lot of people began to realize that it was a kind of information architecture. So they're more interested in the form of this project as well as the content. And so that made me realize as an architect that there's a whole bunch of people out there who have no sense of space, and architects can contribute a lot more than we currently are doing. So that's online, www.skyscraper.org. So join the millions and billions served who scan this thing. I get emails from all across the world still about this project. It's quite interesting, given the attraction of New York. So with the Forest Service, we began to look at the trees in the entire country. It's a national Forest Service. It's part of the Department of Agriculture. And the problem is, this is the pattern of different species in the US, but it's shifting. Climate change is causing all these species to come up the coast, at least in the Northeast we're looking at. And if you look at the pattern of urbanization in the US, there's really only 10 regions in the country that are absorbing most of the growth. These are the 10, and they're megalopoli. They're larger than metropolis single cities. They're systems of cities that are attached by interstates. Who is from the white space on this map? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, quite a few. Who's from the colored spaces on this map? Yeah, okay. Point proven. So how do we put these two patterns together? Climate change, forest succession, and this new urban form that I showed you in the Baltimore ecosystem study that is reaching along these highways and spreading at greater and greater rates. I am not a new urbanist. I do not want to force people to live where they do not want to live, like cities or things like that. I think we need to have solutions for every one of those patches, whether you live way out in the suburbs, inner city, or in the middle, or older suburbs, or newer suburbs. The variety is what interests me. And the people in the Forest Service that I work with are social scientists. they're not even interested in trees. They're interested in people. And so their patches are based on something called prism. Oh, and I have it written down. I won't go to the notes. I'll waste too much time to tell you what prism means. But basically, a company studies census data, and they can tell another corporation where the people are who are going to buy their specific products. It's called niche marketing. They cluster people's lifestyles and preferences in certain areas based on demographics. And so you see the Scrub Pine Flats, of course, are down in Natchez, Mississippi, where I did my project for the Scrub Pine Flats. Back County folks, Appalachia, northern Maine, rustic elders, go to the old farms where people haven't moved to the city. Blue highways. I said, this is ridiculous, right? And then I looked up mine. Intellectual Bohemia. Shops at the Gap. I said, whoops. It's pretty accurate. Grain belt, agribusiness, mines and mills. Tell me when we hit Syracuse. Rural industria. Golden Ponds. A little bit of Golden Ponds coming up to Syracuse. Southside City, family scramble. Hometown retired, small town downtown, inner cities. Oh, Syracuse lit up there. Syracuse is up here. That's not Onondaga County, right? There's a little bit. More Rochester and Buffalo than Syracuse. Syracuse isn't quite even an inner city. Hispanic mix. Here we go. Single city blues. Shotguns and pickups. Oh, very strong showing for Syracuse. Where's your shotgun, Randall? River City. These are the old industrial river valleys. New Ecotopia. Oh, here we go. Here's your faculty, right? Big Sky Families, another strong showing. Military quarters. Yeah, what is this one? Watertown, huh? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a kind of mid-grain analysis. It's not very fine grain. I mean, you can get classifications at hundreds of different kinds of types. And the data we work in is zip code specific. So it's neighborhood scale. This is county, so it's a little bit coarser. So if you're interested, I can look up any of your hometowns that you'd like in the discussion. But I want to move along. Uh-oh, there we go. So in addition to working with the Forest Service, I work as a consultant for the Institute for Ecosystem Studies, which is in Millbrook, New York, right here. And these are the 15 scientists that are working in this project called Spatial Heterogeneity, Mosaics in Landscape and Ecology. And so what I did is map where everybody was working, and I told them they were all urban ecologists. Because the problem is ecologists think they're in nature. And so the first thing is that there is no distinction between architecture and nature. It's just this mixed up thing, as you can see in the analysis of the nationwide analysis and the climate change effect we've had on natural systems. So, so some of the projects are, I mean, they're amazing. So the one guy chases gypsy moths, which love acorns and oak trees. And if they eat too many, the oak trees don't produce so many acorns, and so the mice start to eat gypsy moths. And so, you know, they create these amazing models like this that are animated, that you can see the gypsy moths and the mice and the oak and the acorns interact. That's patch dynamics, that's spatial heterogeneity, that's created in time. Subwater aquatic vegetation, SAV, you know, how grasses under the Hudson River grow and change depending on the flow of the tributaries and other kinds of forces. So, but the kind of structuring concept at this institute, because it's an institute for ecosystem studies, is the idea that comes from the Hubbard Brook experiment up in New Hampshire. And it's again this watershed that I described before. And anyone been to New Hampshire? Do you have any ideas why you would choose New Hampshire as the site of a model to study watersheds? Like you could put a monitoring device down here, or actually the monitoring devices are here, and you could get accurate data. This is land managed by the Forest Service, so they're cutting down trees and then they grow back, and so they're studying this. They've been studying this thing for 40 years. Anyone know the nickname of the New Hampshire? The Granite State. So they found a watershed that wouldn't percolate the water down, but would run it off. And so they're not. It's like a controlled experiment. They can test things. And so this has been an incredible experiment because what they understand is the relationship between species. Before, ecology would just study one thing at a time. An ecosystem study looks at the interrelationship between things. And so this is one of my students at Columbia doing a watershed analysis of the Boston-Washington corridor. And I mean, for me, it's really eye-opening because now I understand why Werner Seligman used to tell me that Syracuse was in the Midwest. Do you see why? Ithaca still drains to the Atlantic. Syracuse drains to those big Great Lakes, right? He was right. So this is our project structure for the Baltimore Ecosystem Study. So we get this whole, so here's the urban design team. But we get the whole cycles from atmospheric deposition, you know, when the dew drops, to the growing of plants based on soil chemistry, the water systems that come through this system, how people interact with all these elements, fluid and dynamic, and then back up, you know, so it's a loop, it's a feedback loop. And then this is a drawing that shows the signature of Baltimore. So this patch system works for you could apply it to any city, but every city will have its own signature. So what I'm modeling here is the number of patches of a particular type. And so you can tell what type of city it is. It has a lot of forests and a lot of farms and grassland. It has some urbanized area which have a certain kind of percentage of trees and things like that. So every city will have a specific signature. And the idea is to get to these patches and to get people to understand themselves in relationship to this watershed, to sort of scale up their imagination from the neighborhood to something larger than the city, which is the sort of watershed which goes from the inner city to the edge city. So the kind of political problems that we have now, given this mentality of center city versus suburb and things like that, is something the watershed tends to break those kind of political boundaries and just look at the social natural systems. So I don't know if you're getting bored yet, but just it's so interesting what it reveals. So the forest stuff is, of course, along the corridors, and the homesteads were around, so there's huge urban parks that protect that, and then some preserved hilltops, but everywhere else it's kind of very patchy. But then and we talked about the building-dominated patches, but look at the pavement-dominated patches. You know, these interstate systems and these huge, huge malls with parking lots, and where they appear. And then the mixed ones, the older suburbs with mature trees. And then looking at a particular neighborhood, let me go back if I can find it. In the city of Baltimore, an old brownstone neighborhood. One more. And so this is an inner city neighborhood that's mapped according to hydrology. There are so many vacant lots in this neighborhood that you could construct a drawing based on if you removed the storm sewer system, where water would flow through the neighborhood. And so that became the basis of urban design guidelines for this neighborhood, where all these community gardeners would understand their block and their neighborhood. I don't know if you can read this drawing, but based on where they were within this sub-watershed, this rainwater drainage system, and construct a landscape that was species-specific for that particular area, whether it was something that would gather a lot of water and be wet, or something uphill that would be drier. So these are the kind of models that, because again, you have to project these design ideas in time, and future models, the social actors, there's a network of business people and NGOs. And then scaling up, this is Mumbai, Shanghai, Boston, Washington. Here you see the problem. So these are the same scale. And we think of Shanghai and Mumbai as being mega cities. These are like cities so huge, under control. But from space, they're very contained in terms of their imprint. This is nighttime imagery, and it shows where everyone has lights on, right? And so, same scale. About the same population in each square. Okay. China, you can see, is well on its way towards this model. India has a thing called democracy. It's getting in the way. They can't quite build the infrastructure to create that yet. And then as the final little episode, Mark's mentioned that I am working in Bangkok. I've been going there for 10 years, every year. It's a Delta rice growing culture. And so this area, this city became a great place for me to think about these ecological processes over centuries of urban form. But as you'll see, it kind of led me to shopping. And I just wanted to go back to the architectural artifact and art and building to really underscore the point that I'm not trying to tell you to all be landscape architects or something. So this is these are the shutters on this temple, which sits in the middle of all these shopping malls. And so so this temple, with its carved shutters, with mirror backgrounds, and the monks kind of circumambulating around these corridors and reflecting in these mirrors and thinking about the culture and Buddhism and then the architecture of these new malls is quite spectacular, with LED technologies and glass and incredible intensity of imagery. And in a country that has a monsoon climate, so 6 months a year it's wet and 6 months it's dry. And here's the nighttime imagery. You can see where Bangkok is situated. It's kind of this spider that goes up the river valleys, and the kind of cities that this boutique airline that Randall's going to take, or is going to visit. So Phnom Penh, but Angkor Wat is in Siem Reap, and so you can see the relationship of Bangkok to Southeast Asia. That dark space is Burma, Laos, and Cambodia, which remain primarily agricultural countries. This is the topography map over that nighttime imagery. And what I'm looking at are the historical capitals. So Chiang Mai was an older river valley capital. Sukhothai was a capital after Angkor was defeated. Ayutthaya was the capital of the Kingdom of Siam for about 300 years, and now Bangkok. And so historically, the capital has also come down the watershed. And so the new perspective is out, perspective 39, and so these drawings were done for that. So what I'm looking at is how each of these historical cities were formed in relationship to water. And so Sukhothai is in a floodplain, Ayutthaya is on the confluence, it's an island on a confluence of rivers, and Bangkok, of course, is a delta city. So these are cities that responded to these local conditions as opposed to Angkor, which is this amazing center of an empire that completely ignores any kind of local topography. It's this idealization of a cosmology located in the center of the country. So this is the cosmological model from Angkor, and this is our watershed model. So I was kind of interested in exploring this relationship in Bangkok. Bangkok has rice paddies to the east and fruit orchards to the west, and they just finished a ring road that is eating its way through the rice and the pomelos and mangoes and coconuts, and it's completely American-style urbanism. It's all single-family houses that are being built along this ring road. And so with a colleague in Bangkok, we're looking at the satellite imagery every year, but then with his graduate students, we interview and do field checks in each of these different kinds of landscapes every year. So the idea is to begin to monitor the relationship between micro decisions when a farmer decides to sell his or her land and the impact from space. And so that's this idea of close-up and remote that I talked about before. So these are some of those, which I'd love to talk about. But then back to the center of the city. Here's our temple that we looked at. So I said, okay, I understand the history of skyscrapers. What about the history in New York? What about the history of shopping in Bangkok as a patch dynamic system? So this is the first shopping center in Bangkok. It's Chulalongkorn University is right here. These are the royal rice fields that were given to the university. And for its endowment, to keep it in shape, it built something with this new kind of idea that they got from America called park and shop. Park your car here and shop in a little shop there. So this is park and shop. It also introduced bowling, the first bowling alley in Thailand, and air-conditioned cinema, the two first air-conditioned cinemas. This is 1964. Anything going on in Southeast Asia in 1964? Huh? Why would American shopping be built next to this Buddhist temple near the King's Land, near the university? And this is the canal where they used to come to the temple by boat, and the lotus gardens here that were on the... Why would they be interested in parking and shopping in 1964? It's the last question. We don't get out of the room to answer. You guys are so young. Vietnam. The Vietnam War is basically staged from Thailand. They built about 6 B-52 bases within Thailand. All the bombing, all the soldiers for rest and recreation went through Thailand. So this was also a place for social mixing. So Thais were meeting these, interesting new foreigners who, shucks, from some of those pine barrens that we saw on the other map. So it's this incredible cultural incubation that's happening there. There's so this is smaller properties you can see. So smaller little shopping centers are built in the 70s. The first indoor air-conditioned atrium escalator shopping center was built in 1974 across the street from Park and Shop. Then the first mixed-use mall, hotel, 6 levels of shopping, office building, MBK Center built there. The first department store here. this small. You know how they built the tallest building right before the economic crash? This was like planned for even the biggest mall, 1990s, 95, 96. Economic crisis, 1997, the same effect that the stock market crash had in the US in 1929. In East Asia, the baht devalued, the whole country, all the construction sites were halted. And so this tower here is a concrete shell for about 20 years, but the mall did manage to open. So this is the oil city. All the parking shop happens here, big parking deck here, here. Each one has its own parking lot or parking deck. You couldn't go from one to the other. They were all enclaves. The traffic was so bad in between, you could like go to one, but God forbid your friend was at the other one. It started to densify with some more hotel and other shopping centers there. In 97, that's the last one before the crash. Then what happened? They decided to build the mass transit system. So this is the SkyTrain, the BTS SkyTrain in Bangkok. Opened in 1999, December 1999, in celebration of the millennium. And it became this symbol of revival. I mean, this sort of, piece of mass transit where instead of just going to one place, you can get on your cell phone, your friend was in the department store and you were in the mall, you could hop on the train and go there. So it's quite remarkable this thing developed as a three-dimensional over-the-street armature in the city. There are two lines in the SkyTrain. One goes like that, one goes like that, one goes like that. So there's kind of these two things passing each other. And for 1 kilometer, they join. And so there's one central station which transfers here. So what happened is the mall started to renovate. And they turned themselves inside out. They created plazas and second-level connections directly to the SkyTrain. So first was this MBK Center, then the department store. So there's 3 stops here in the train. 1, 2, 3. So this one plugged into that stop. This one plugged into that stop. The smaller ones, they formed a business improvement district, and they built a walkway here that connected. That first atrium one got connected. And then a new mall got built. And when they built this new mall, they had this great idea. We'll turn the mall inside out. So the atriums and the vertical circulation, the elevators, are on the outside instead of on the inside. And so the station turns into this incredible space where everyone is on these multi-level train platforms and everyone's going up and down the escalators. And so what happened, and the Thais were quite amazed, they said, wow, we have a city just like New York or Paris. We have urbanity. We can go in a place not with shopping in mind, but just to hang out and meet. So it's quite amazing, the emergence of this space, which wasn't planned. Obviously the SkyTrain was planned, but this wasn't kind of conceived of. It just kind of happened. They finally renovated this tower, and they completely renovated that mall. It's now the largest shopping mall in Southeast Asia. And so this is the timeline that I'm working on now for this new book that Mark talked about. And you can see both the financial crisis and the infrastructure and the transformation from the enclave city to the armature city, to use Graham Shane's recombinant urbanism language. So this is a little fun SketchUp model I did with students there, and so we're able to cut through this city, because what it is it's the Asian city. It's like these dream cities of Hugh Ferris of multi-level public space. not quite, I mean semi-public in some cases, but a lot of these spaces are outdoors and freely accessible. So basically that whole kilometer you can walk now, and you can go from the inside of one mall through the whole exterior space above the street level. So this is our Noli model of this armature. And then some of the architecture, you can see the renovation of that 70s building with the new glass wall and the new bridge that was created to the SkyTrain. This is the SkyTrain. And at night, you know, this inside-outside shopping center. So this is the old Park and Shop stuff. So it was a concrete frame. They just removed the facades and built these glass walls. And this was all terracotta. They put it down, glass walls. You're on the bridge here that goes from one plaza in between two malls to the other one. But just around the corner, so I was interested in kind of the big actors, the urban actors. You have the big actors who are, you know, dynamically manipulating form and space of the city, and then you have the small actors. So these are the ice makers on the small alley behind the shopping mall, who deliver the ice to the restaurants in the Park and Shop place. So this business, you know, we interviewed them. They were opened in 1964 at the same time in a shop house, Chinese owners, as you can see the little temple to their shrine to their ancestors. And so every night, and then the red light is that there's a short-term hotel across the street. So that's what gives it the kind of hot, cool kind of thing. It sort of epitomizes the tropical city. And so they have to insulate this room and keep these. It's such a great sustainable business. You know, keep the ice frozen, and they live upstairs. You know, so. And then in the morning, they grind the ice. And these guys have their bicycles. And you see the sack? I don't know if you can see it. This is from a low-resolution movie. But they have to bike through, you know, these stacks of crushed ice through all the traffic under those shopping malls to go from diagonally across the intersection. So this is Bangkok patch dynamics. This is the monk from the temple that I just described crossing the street because people in the neighborhood give him offerings. And this is the inside of the temple, which today is a meditation training center. So you go in there, and the frescoes are all these guys, the great meditators, in the middle of this incredible conglomeration of shopping centers. And you see the lotus. It was sitting in that lotus garden. And then I don't know if you can see it, but in the attic fresco is the watershed. There's the royal barge procession. So once a year at Buddhist Lent, the king would bring robes to the monks on the canal into this temple. And so you're sitting there with the meditators and looking at this thing spinning around, and you hear the SkyTrain kind of screeching around the corner. And it's concrete viaduct. That's it. Any questions? I didn't leave enough time. But that's my little tour. I mean, I have the kind of polemic that I can read at the end, but I'll spare you. Any questions? Yes? I'm sorry?
I'm just curious who's operating on this research or this information.
which one in particular? The Thailand work, the India-China work, the Baltimore work, the Forest Service work?
India, Baltimore. I mean, outside of those people who are trying to figure out where to sell things or where to plant things, I'm just curious what other models for operating
As I mentioned, Mark asked me to talk about the research, and so you're looking at 4 research projects that are things that are in the studios. Some of them are part of architecture studios. Some I do out at my office, and but in my office we also work with developers and nonprofits and things like that. And so maybe the answer to your question is more website. We can see the build work in relationship to some of the research, but there's various audiences for the work, because most of the work is, a lot of the work is publicly funded research work. And so for instance, the skyscraper project, that was the New York State Council of the Arts Technical Initiative Grant for the Skyscraper Museum. So part of that project, I sat with, in the Skyscraper Museum was in these bank lobbies on Wall Street, so anybody could walk in, all the tourists, the bankers, the city planning people, they would all come in. So I had to develop the project as a kind of guinea pig in there, building the model and seeing what other people, and I fought it. I said, Carol, you're crazy, you know? But she said, this is a public project. You have to, you know, but it was amazing because I think the website that you saw, which, you know, has millions and millions of people visited and learn from it, and, you know, I'm saying, it makes me think, okay, how many people see the things I built? And how many people look at this website? So I began to say, okay, the scale of the problem and the reach of the architect has to be beyond the building. And I really, really feel there's a lot of truth to what Beatrice Colomina said, that architecture became modern when it was mediated. And that's the only moment. It wasn't, you know, the international style or, you know, the concrete frame or the domino house. It's because Le Corbusier made a magazine first before he built a building and had to get those advertisements in there. And he understood the power of the media. And in her article, she explains how he manipulates the photographs in order to make his architecture ideas much more apparent to the public. So the book is Publicity and Privacy. So I really believe we have to build in the world at every scale. And so that's why I have nonprofit clients, and it's like the tiniest little thing that I spent, you know, ages designing. But then also, between when I took off from the plane and landed, I was asked to change a 5 million square foot development in Elizabeth, New Jersey, because the renderers in Argentina were gonna make the marketing image and they didn't like the way it looked. So, you know, I did a 5-minute sketch when I landed here, barely got to this lecture, and you know, that's how we operate as architects in the 21st century. And all the work, all the research is, like Mark said, completely coming from my own will, but it's operating with various arenas and actors that I have to collaborate with. And so it's always this sort of tension between a sort of line or force of thought and testing it in different places in the world.
Can I ask
Yeah.
something related to that? Is there, do you close that loop coming from a very, sorry. I'm just wondering if you close that loop coming from a very media-driven analytical work, which is also looking at sort of historical developments. And if you take that outcome and then inform new developments, and so is there a loop between the digital and the media world that you're describing and then the manifestation in the physical world?
Yeah, more so, because I think I mentioned it briefly but didn't go into, so all these watersheds are monitored, so there's more and more real-time data that's embedded into all these systems that are part of this feedback loop. So the whole process of design is not this single act of creation, working drawings, build, but a kind of continuous feedback and alteration kind of model. But that's really what I'm interested in. So I mean, the expanded architect is sort of giving up a lot of control over a lot of detail, and so in some places, in some relationships.
So it's that you've got a methodology in place, and now you can sort of purpose-driven application. So you use it basically.
Yeah, I mean, I can. I mean, like one project we're doing is so bizarre. I mean, it's like the real world is stranger than any fiction that I could create in my research imagination. So the current project in Baltimore is for each of those, I mean, for some of those hundreds of patches we're developing, we have a yard typology, how the kind of furniture and use of the backyard, the American backyard and front yard and tree belt and things like that, an amazing database. And so we're designing not for a client who owns the house and yard, but we're designing variables in order for people to be surveyed about their preferences, and then the ecologists model their preferences within the particular patch and scale it up and measure the impact on the watershed. And so it's a completely altered client-architect relationship. We do these kind of degrees of variables that are statistically analyzed. And so we try to get what people prefer to do. Again, I mean, I'm not a new urbanist, I'm not an eco-fascist. The whole idea of showing the Bangkok thing was that, you know, the importance of human desire in shaping these spaces over time in relationship to other spaces. And so, yeah. Let's have a drink.